This is a lecture from OpenTuition.
Before you embark on listening to any more of these lectures, you really have to go to the ACCA website and download the question paper. It's going to be pretty useless listening to me if you haven't familiarized yourself with the question paper, with the introduction to it, with the requirements, and the various exhibits, 6 exhibits, which there are there. We always recommend that even though you might initially concentrate on just requirement 1, nevertheless that all the exhibits and all the other question detail is read carefully, because there are often pieces of relevant information to question 1, if you like, which might appear tucked away in one of the later exhibits. There's not necessarily a kind of one-to-one matching of parts of questions to individual specific exhibits. So if you haven't got this question paper, if you haven't studied it to some extent to become vaguely familiar with what's going on there, then I thoroughly recommend that you do that. And I would also, I think, recommend that you think about how you would approach requirements 1A and B. In other words, you'll get more from the lecture if you maybe even make a little answer plan, not in any great detail, but the sort of approach you would take, and then maybe compare it to what I say, my suggested approach, and then ultimately the model answer, what it says. And sometimes I will perhaps differ a little bit between what I think is the proper approach and maybe what actually appears in the model answer. And that's fine. I think they realize in complex scenario questions like you get in strategic business leadership, that there can be several viable suggestions or answers. And as long as you can put up proper arguments, I suppose, as long as you take information from the question, make reasonable assumptions or decisions based on that information, as long as you do that with confidence and explain what you're saying properly, you will get lots and lots of marks, even if your answer is sometimes considerably different from maybe what's in the model answer. And this idea of having confidence is important. And I think, again, the way to approach it is not to worry initially too much about models. People get very kind of concerned, how to know what model to use for what question. I would always think about initially thinking about the answer on a common sense basis. If you had to write this report or produce these PowerPoint slides for your boss, what would you put on them? And then after you've done the, what I call common sense approach, after that, look around to see if, yes, maybe that model would have helped, or maybe I can justify my decision by using that particular model. I would say just in advance that although I use this term common sense, and it goes a long way in producing decent answers, this is not an exam in common sense. And in particular, there are 2 areas in the exam where specific techniques are known, need to be known. One is in requirement 1B, and we'll speak about that when we get there. And the other very specific model, which is hinted at, is really what I think they want you to use in the final question. And again, I'll mention that when we get there. But there are 2 very specific approaches, frameworks, if you like, one of which is absolutely necessary. It's a technique coming from performance management, a mathematical technique. I don't want to say what it is just now, because I want you to see if you can think what it is. And then there's a very specific model. They don't say use it, but there's a heavy hint that might be useful in answering the final question. So it's not an exam in common sense. You do need to know frameworks, models, and so on. And these give strength very often to your arguments, and they help you to maybe arrange the data, arrange your thought process into a kind of familiar pattern, which is often very helpful in solving the problem. Anyway, on to requirement 1A. And just reading that, it says the sales director has asked you to provide a set of notes to accompany the presentation he has prepared for the board, which discuss how the sales development strategies he has proposed will assist adults in achieving its strategic aim. Slides are not required. And now very, very importantly in this exam, the kind of, I call it, hint as to where you need to concentrate on your arguments, if you like, or the points you want to make here. And here it wants commercial acumen skills. Commercial acumen skills is basically thinking, in real life, would this work? That's the easiest way I can put professional acumen skills. Or, somebody could come up with some idea and you think, God, that is never going to fly. And it's almost wishful thinking on the part of the proposer of the idea. Or even if it works, maybe you put in certain caveats and warnings about what we need to look out for. Showing clear awareness of the organizational wider external factors which should contribute to the achievement of Pulse's strategic aim. So mentioned twice in this is the term strategic aim. It's mentioned there to assist us on achieving the strategic aim, and it's mentioned there. And we need to know what that is, quite obviously. And therefore we would expect to see buried in the information something which sets out the organization's strategic aim. And indeed, in one of the exhibits here, the first exhibit here, it's got a section saying the strategic aims. And one is to develop the product range and our markets. So it's kind of potentially new products and potentially new markets is what they want to be doing there. By focusing on offering customers the products they demand. Good marketing. There's another one focusing on performance excellence, leadership, operations, supply management, and so on there. Which, frankly, I think when you get into reading it, that strategic aim is probably not going to be something which the sales director's proposals are going to help with. I think this one here, that the sales director is looking particularly at sales development strategies, and this should be linked to the strategic aim of new products and new markets, which together, or product extension if you like, range extension, which taken together will help sales growth with the sales development. And indeed, in the question, it does say that the company's sales have stagnated somewhat over the past years. And one of the things they're looking at is how we could stimulate growth, how we can get back into a more profitable trajectory for the company in the future. So we need to look at the stated aim, developing the product range in its markets, and the 3 sales development strategies that the sales director has come up with are basically set out in Exhibit 2 here. One is focusing on their existing shops. One is focusing on website development and what can be done with that. And one is focusing on what you might call strategic partners, retail partners. In other words, not just selling through our own shops, but extending beyond the supermarkets we already sell to extending where else we might be able to go to. Now, I think here, so we can get to a common sense basis there, but we are, in a way, I think, being asked here to discuss how the sales development strategies. It's almost, and I think lying behind this idea of discussing the sales development strategies, it doesn't quite use it. It doesn't quite say evaluate. But I think if you are going to be discussing the sales development strategies, you would need to be saying what's good about this strategy, what its strengths are, and perhaps what its weaknesses are. And I think if you're discussing is a very open verb to be putting in here. I think, although you may not come to a particular conclusion about which of the strategies is best, and are not necessarily mutually exclusive, I think we do want to put forward, our thoughts about how likely the success might be, where maybe the danger areas are as well, so that the sales director is almost forewarned of points that might be raised by the board during the presentation. And I think whenever you are almost evaluating a strategy, I don't want to use that word too much, discussing a strategy here or discussing a decision, it struck me that one of the useful frameworks might be the SFA one. That is basically a kind of strategy evaluation, or helping you to decide between competing strategies. It is looking in SFA, it is looking to see whether or not you think a particular strategy is suitable. Is it suitable to the sort of company we have, which is relatively upmarket, which is well known within the organization, within the country, which attracts people when they're buying gifts and presents and so on there. Is that strategy suitable? And I would say, let's kind of preempt things a little bit here. Let's say we went to the third potential strategy, which was down here, a wider range of our products to retail partners in the next 2 years, and also get a wider range of retail partners. I mean, they're selling to supermarkets, and another place they could potentially sell to is filling stations. So when you're filling up with petrol, the filling stations are now full of groceries and so on now. You could have some of these chocolates available, and of course people are often travelling to visit friends and so on. It'd be quite a good place maybe to pick up a box of chocolates as a gift. But you could just put a little bit of a warning in there. Well, if this is regarded as a kind of luxury, semi-luxury brand, upmarket brand, would we be damaging it if we were to choose the wrong type of retail partners? And that's that is showing commercial acumen. That is showing how a brand can be damaged by what in marketing terms is called the place, the almost the distribution point you go to. It has to be suitable for the nature of the brand. And then there is feasibility. The first one here, investment in refurbishment. I think I may even mention the amount of money. I can't remember just at the moment. It might take to do that. Have we got the capital which would take to actually? I'm just trying to find out if it does actually mention the amount of money. I don't think it does, but there's 165 shops. And that would require considerable capital investment if you're going to refurbish them all, even if it's over a period of years. We're going to be retraining people, and that is expensive. And then there is, of course, closing 20 shops to concentrate on the most profitable locations. Out of 165, I don't think realistically, the closure of 20 shops, presumably in relatively small towns, and presumably not very popular anyway, because otherwise they would be more profitable. I don't think that's going to be a big problem. You could put in maybe a little tiny warning that would have to be careful to treat what's probably a loyal staff sympathetically and give good deals, offer to redeploy them and so on there. But I think the main bar to feasibility in that one would be the refurbishment. I think it's suitable. I think if you are promoting a brand as being fairly upmarket, and I think people have got a higher perception now of how shops and so on are if you like, decorated inside. I think this making the shops more attractive is a very feasible way and suitable way of maybe attracting more people. And then, is it acceptable? Is it acceptable to customers? What happens if customers don't like the refurbished shops? They would prefer the old-fashioned ones. It's obviously not very acceptable to employees who are going to be made redundant, but I think we could make it acceptable by reasonable payoffs. I think you can go through it like that, and this SFA is a tremendously useful, simple format for assessing the likely success of strategies, or comparing various strategies and recommending maybe one over the other. Website developments, other gift ideas, international sales growth. There's quite a lot in that. And again, if we go to SFA, they do have online sales, but it's not clear to what extent they have huge in-house expertise for sophisticated website development. Other gift ideas, well, we would have to make sure that we invent or think of ideas which don't hurt the existing brand, which support the brand, which we'd be proud to put there. So as well as maybe producing chocolates, you produce nice biscuits, shortbread, something of that type. It could be they begin selling fancy teas and coffees and so on. Those would be kind of the sort of things that they might be able to make a success with. Maybe flowers, although there's a whole issue there about keeping them fresh and so on. I found when I read it, the idea of international sales growth was very intriguing. This is in the kind of element of website development, and website development is essentially something which grabs members of the public. You don't really particularly develop a website to make business-to-business sales. It's much more, it seems to me, a business-to-consumer way of marketing your goods. People Google your name, Google chocolate, something of that sort, and up pop these brands that you have, and you offer to sell them. I got a little kind of worried about people from abroad ordering chocolates from abroad to be shipped out to them. Because there are almost certainly likely to be health regulations, or what I want to say, food standards regulations, really. Most countries get very picky about what sort of food they let into the country to make sure it is safe and so on. And there's also a whole business about transport. How are you going to transport chocolate, something which is susceptible to high temperatures, and get it to, over several days' journey, perhaps by post, I assume, or by courier? How are you going to make sure that it arrives in pristine condition and hasn't been affected by excessive temperatures? You can get couriers to guarantee that it's kept below a particular temperature, but that tends to be used for specialist stuff like pharmaceuticals or something of that sort. And it's expensive. And I'm not sure it'll actually work for a box of chocolates. So again, we have to think of suitability. Other gifts ideas, fine. I'm not sure international sales growth via the website is. Feasibility, same idea. Feasibility, international, a bit awkward. And then acceptability. Well, perhaps the danger there is if you sell more online, you're going to sell less through your shops. And there is a kind of interaction between idea 1 and idea 2 here that we would need to be careful not to cannibalize too much the sales of the shops. But of course, I'm now speaking from, of course, after the pandemic or during the pandemic, when consumer preferences have changed from perhaps going out and visiting shops to much, much more being bought online. And all retailers are having to think about the balance between real shops, the bricks, if you like, and internet sales, the clicks, if you like. And it would seem to me that if they do accelerate sales over the website, there is a danger that they will have to sell or close eventually more than the 20 shops they're currently planning. And then partners, strategic partners to sell a wider range of our products, retail partners. And let's just get back to these strategic aims here, just to make sure we've covered them here. Investment, refurbishment of shops, staff training to improve customer experience. That is not of itself, of course, going to address increasing the product range, or will not of itself increase the markets. But nevertheless, it may be a useful thing to do because if you manage to get more people into your shops, this will give you the money to develop new products and to develop new markets. The second one, website development, other gift idea, internet. Well, that does go for new markets and new products very, very directly there. Although we have our worries about the extent to which it may be always feasible. And then finally, partners aiming to sell a wider range of products to retail partners next 2 years and a wider range of retail partners. Certainly, if you develop a wider range of retail partners, provided we think they're suitable, provided they want us, and again, the more that's sold through retail partners, the less is going to be sold through our own shops. Certainly, if you go into more supermarkets, more petrol filling stations and so on, you're probably going to sell to a wider range of individuals. You've got to widen the market a little bit. And we may, I suppose, also use it as an opportunity to begin to sell a wider range of products. So if you are thinking of putting stuff into filling stations, for example, it might be instead of always selling just big boxes of chocolates, somebody might just want something to eat on the journey. It might give us a reason to produce smaller little boxes of chocolates you can put in a passenger seat and kind of nibble as you go up the motorway, something of that sort. Now, that may be rubbish, but I'm trying to go back, thinking: is it suitable? Is it feasible? Is it acceptable? To whom is it acceptable? To the shareholders, to employees, to the people who are the managers, if you like, perhaps of the existing shops and so on. Is it feasible to sell abroad? Is it feasible to develop our website? Is it a suitable way of trying to promote ourselves by going into petrol stations and other locations? You don't necessarily have to religiously go through SFA for each of these. But it's a little kind of checklist going on back there. Is it suitable, feasible, acceptable? Will it help us to develop our sales, and in particular to develop the range of products and to develop the kind of variety of customers, the markets to which we are selling? Requirement 1b. The preamble to Requirement 1b says that considering manufacturing a range of 3 new luxury handmade chocolates, A, B, C, for 2 retail partners. However, due to a shortage of skilled labour, they would be unable to fully supply both retail partners. It has to decide which order should be prioritised. Now, I have few, and there is information given in the exhibits about the contribution and the labour hours and so on for each of the 3 products, and also the potential orders per month that will be required from each of the sales outlets. Now, you should be able to think, even before we go any further here, you should be able to think of a very specific technique. We are dealing here with limited resources, restricted resources, critical resources, whatever you want to call them. Some people call it key factor type resources or key factor analysis. And what we should be looking at here is really a performance management topic, and it is essentially evaluating what can be done on the basis of contribution per unit of restricted resource needed. Absolutely classic key factor analysis, restricted resource analysis. So this is something which doesn't specifically appear on the syllabus, but remember that leading into this are previous skills which have been learnt in previous exams. And in the strategic management leadership question, you have to be familiar with, in particular, I think, performance management, and also, I think, financial management, because you can quite easily see how aspects of financial management, using maybe net present value or net present value per dollar needed in the capital restricted period and so on, can come into determining, which of 2 strategies is better, or which mixture of strategies is actually feasible. Now, I'm not going to go through the key factor analysis here, the contribution per labour hour, I think it is, that's needed here. This is old stuff. It's very well set out in the answer. All I'm going to do here is to maybe point out is you hopefully will have spotted that this is to be solved by contribution per unit of labour hour. But then, and you might do the calculations, but I just want to draw your attention to what is kind of surrounding that. And first is you have to draw up a report. So it needs at the front, the to, from, about, the date on which has been written and so on. It needs an introduction. And the way I would do a report is I would, have the introduction, and I would almost certainly go on to the recommendation next, or maybe paragraph 2, if you like, said this has been evaluated according to the criteria of contribution per unit of labour needed, and that this is set out in Appendix 1. I don't think you'd lose a huge number of marks if you put the calculations in the middle of the report, but it's pretty normal to put out calculations to an appendix. And there's no reason why you can't actually put, for this purpose of the exam, the appendix at the start. I think the markers know that you don't know how many pages you'll need for the rest of the report. and you could put at the start of your answer appendix all your calculations, and you could put in brackets afterwards if you wanted to. Normally this would be at the end, but in an exam setting it's at the start. But then it requires recommendation with justification. That's okay. And that's basically what the calculation is going to be doing there. And I think these two are very, very close in here anyway. I think once you've evaluated the financial, non-financial implications, remember non-financial implications, it might be, when you read into it, that if we, we're going to disappoint one of these retail outlets, and I think the particular non-financial implication is what are they going to do? Would we maybe expect them to turn somewhere else? But could we be doing ourselves damage if we say no to a very powerful partner and say yes to the weaker one? That sort of thing. But what we have to do here is communication skills, which is a curious thing, I think, to put into this question. I could understand evaluation skills, but communication skills is odd. And I think what they want you to do is to explain carefully the basis of your calculation and why it is important to get a kind of earning rate, contribution earning rate, eking out the use of these labour hours by giving it to the best possible product and the best possible customer first, and to actually explain the calculation as you're doing it. Anyway, that's all I'm going to say on this. I'm not going to go through, as I said, the calculations themselves. They're very well laid out in the answer. Hopefully you did see it was a key factor, critical factor type analysis. And do remember to dress up your answer. It's more than just producing figures. Here we have to explain why we're doing those calculations and explain and justify our recommendation at the end of that.